The post-apocalypse can look like what you see in the Fallout series, but also like Inherit the Earth, where foxes, ferrets and boars inhabit the world. The latter was also the inspiration for Of Blades and Tales, a turn-based role-playing game with a pixel look and a gameplay which is similar to that of Roguelikes, but without going for a permadeath mechanic. The game, which could be described as a one-man project by the developer Felix Laukel, was released on the 9th of November 2023, after it had been in early access for over a year. In this review, we will check out what Of Blades and Tales has to offer, but also where it still got some room for improvement. And with that, let's dive in. We begin our journey with Ryke the Fox, a predefined character who is on his way back to his home village. These first few meters also serve as an introduction to the mechanics, which are very easy to understand and similar to those of roguelikes. We can either control the character with the mouse by clicking on the target field to let the character move there, or control him more precisely via keyboard to move one tile at a time, as you know it from roguelikes, where usually each movement and action also ends the turn, which is then followed by the enemy's actions. We kill our first enemy, a giant beetle, by beating it up with our fists and get our first weapon. We then learn that we have a total of 3 character resources. Besides of health, we also got stamina and mana, which are consumed when using abilities and spells and are replenished by eating some plants, meat of beetles and mushrooms. Refreshed, we continue on our way and reach the village, which is just located in the adjacent sector. Over there, we talk to our friend Tana, who tells us that our mentor hasn't returned from his recent cave expedition in the east, and that we should check whether everything is okay. For easy tracking of all quests, we also get an entry to our quest log. However, there aren't a whole lot of quests in the game. I would estimate that if you ignored the individual quest steps and all the go to the next village quests, there wouldn't be many more than just 10 quests left for this 30 to 40 hour long game. Before we head off, we take a quick look around the village. In the northeast, we find a beetle farmer who also got a quest for us to defend his farm at night. We find a few vendors where we can not only buy and sell items, but also extract special bonuses and add them to other items. This looks like a very nice mechanic, but later on it suffers from a bad overview and the usefulness also disappears once you find more and more legendary items that have very strong special bonuses but cannot be modified. There's also a cartographer. When we find scraps of a map, we can pay him to assemble them and then go on a treasure hunt with that finished map, a bit like in Heroes of Might and Magic 3. It's another cool idea, but it quickly loses its appeal in practice, especially because the treasures are scaling with your own level, and the items you find that way somewhat lose their value, also thanks to the legendary items, which are just better. Lastly, we also find a storage box in the city. While there isn't a limit in how much we can carry, it's great to have such a storage for keeping things organized and more easily track items which were found more recently. By the way, as you might have assumed already, the rarity of the items is reflected by their font color, and this then also determines how many stat enchantments can exist on that item. As we are ready for our journey, let's have a look at the world map. It is divided into many individual sectors through which we can travel by just walking to the edges of each sector. However, there's also a quick travel option, which for the cost of some food allows us to easily revisit locations with campfires, like towns, that have already been discovered. The map also shows us whether there are any points of interest in the surrounding sectors. While the important ones are marked with yellow question marks, the not so important ones can still be identified by the numbers in the sector info. I would have liked to see a bit more in that regard. I already mentioned that there aren't a lot of quests, and unfortunately that goes hand in hand with the points of interest, which most of the time aren't really anything super interesting. Just northeast of the first village you can find a stranded caravan also offering a quest. Something like that should have been much more common. So we go and fight our way through to the target sector. The monsters in the game's different biomes are often some types of insects, but quite varied and also have very different abilities, so that you have to adapt constantly and pay attention to different aspects. Of course, we also gain experience points by killing enemies of a similar level, but also by just collecting plants. And at some point we will have enough for a level up, which grants us one attribute point we can distribute right away and a skill point we can spend when we meditate at a campfire. We can also find such a campfire just in front of the cave our mentor possibly got lost in. There we can now decide which skill we want to unlock with that point. In addition to skills for different weapon types and magic schools, there are also categories such as survival and engineering that can be combined with various weapon types. In addition to passive bonuses, there are also unlockable active skills that can be dragged over into our action bars. We have one of these with 5 slots for each of the 2 weapon sets. Although they switch together with the weapons, which normally counts as action and ends the turn, there is a passive ability that makes this change free, effectively decoupling the weapons from the abilities and making the total of 10 slots available at any time. Even though this is a must-have, which is a bit too powerful, I think that overall the character system works rather well. It offers many possible combinations and also makes you think about your decision when leveling up. I will get back to the balancing a bit later. At the campfire, we can also save manually. Since the game only saves automatically when you change zones, it makes sense to do it manually when you were trading in the city for a bit and then decide to end your gaming session for now. However, saving always occurs in the same save slot, of which you can have several, but only one for each individual playthrough. If you die in the game, this save will be reloaded automatically. If you choose the hardest difficulty setting at the start of the game, you will also lose gold and experience after the game loaded automatically after each death. With these stakes, it gets more tense and also feels a bit more like a real roguelike. We descend into the cave to look for our missing mentor, fight against the one or other enemy along the way, and quickly find the guy. While he doesn't seem to be in the best shape anymore, he is still alive and asks us to return back to the village and warn Tana. Something strange seems to be going on, and he tells us that there is an insect with magical abilities deeper in the cave. We can now go deeper and fight against that insect, which is kind of a boss fight which you will encounter every now and then during the playthrough. But we decide to get back to the village first and complete our quest, which is when the real adventure begins. In order to investigate the matter with the aggressive and magical insects, we are tasked to travel south to a town called Immerford, inhabited by rat and ferret people. As mentioned at the beginning, the game is heavily inspired by Inherit the Earth, a point-and-click adventure from the 90s that has a very similar backstory. When we start the game, we also get a short and very basic intro in which this story is briefly presented via some cave paintings. Many years ago, humans populated the world, but due to an unknown event, they just vanished. Magic arose, animals became more humanoid, began to speak and use their hands. This also means that we are ultimately still playing on Earth, in whose history humans also existed. Humans who left their traces in the form of garbage and ruins, which we will stumble upon at some point. Over the course of the game, we will get into different biomes, past numerous enemies, and also into a few settlements. The balancing in terms of the difficulty throughout the game, which as mentioned has a length of about 30 to 40 hours of playtime, appeared to me as somewhat unpolished. I played on the hardest difficulty called Challenge, which may have further magnified any issues. Especially the first 3 hours of the game are quite brutal on that difficulty level if you don't get better and more suitable weapons and don't invest your money well. Which in turn is hardly necessary later on in the game. The game gets easier and easier towards the end until you can take down almost all enemies with just one shot during an ambush, and hardly anything is a threat anymore. About halfway through the game, and by this point you're in a much better position already, doing pretty good against all enemies on your own level, you enter the forest, where 4 ghosts appear after a timer runs out, and they will kill you within just one turn. One tactic would be to actually log out of the game and log back in to reset that timer to get throughout the forest. This, by the way, also resets all zones and enemies, as their status is only being retained during the same gaming session. There are also ways to reset that ghost timer in the game itself, but these are ultimately dependent on luck. And while you might assume that a fixed max level of 25 would then help to realign the balancing near the end of the game, the opposite seems to be the case. On the hard difficulty level, the enemies right at the start are actually higher in their level than what the zone indicates. But near the end, when you get to areas with zone levels of 25 to 30, the enemies seem to be stuck at 25 as well, basically downgrading them compared to the start. I have already mentioned the problem caused by legendary items that make make other aspects obsolete. So in terms of the balance, there's still room for improvement. And as the game is still being patched, there are also some chances of issues still being ironed out. The pixel graphics are quite well done. While there aren't many true animations, the game lets sprites wobble to kinda simulate movement, and that actually works well to make the visuals feel more alive. While I wouldn't call it outstanding in terms of graphics, I did like the overall look. I also like the music, which wasn't written specially for the game, but does a great job in giving the various environments a nice atmosphere. The official language versions of the game are English and German, as the developer also happens to be German. But it's also possible to play the game in various other languages where community translations were integrated into the game already. I spent most of my time with the German version, but also briefly checked the quality of the English one and didn't see any issues there. Mostly judging from the German texts, I would say that they are well written, but they are not as exceptional as Jeff Vogel's writing in the Spiderweb games, for example. The amount of text in Of Blades and Tales is also much smaller though. And with that, it's time to get to the conclusion. I had quite some fun diving into the post-apocalyptic fantasy world of Blades and Tales, in which you don't fight against the usual orcs and goblins, but against insects, forest creatures and of course bandits consisting of rat people, ferrets and boars. While the world was nicely presented, it was lacking a few more interesting things to discover. Some more locations and a few more NPCs with quests would have been nice. While they are leading the player through the game quite well, exploring could have been made more interesting. For that, the treasure hunt was a nice idea, but its implementation isn't entirely optimal, also considering the legendary items. The character system and the combat are solid, but the balancing is not, which means that the combat loses some of its appeal during the game. Nevertheless, I enjoyed the journey, developing my character, fighting bugs and helping my fellow animals. As an overall rating, I give the game a thumbs halfway up, with potential for a full thumbs up if patches add more content, which make the world feel more alive and also adjust the balance. The standard price for the game without sale is just under 15 euros or $15, so if the game has piqued your interest and you're looking for something more relaxed, then you can certainly buy it without any sale and won't regret it. And that's it from me for Of Blades and Tales. If you liked this review or found it helpful, then I'd appreciate if you leave a thumbs up. In case you're interested in more reviews and videos about RPGs, tactics games and retro topics, then please consider subscribing to this channel. My full Let's Play can be found on my separate German Let's Play channel, in case you're interested. Thank you for watching. I'm now getting back to my little animal friends in Immerfurt. See you next time. Bye bye.